Today, our guest is Lindsay Barton Barrett from Douglas Elliman in New York City, specifically Brooklyn, although she works all of Manhattan. But let me tell you more about Lindsay. Now, veteran New York City broker Lindsay Barton Barrett sets herself apart in a crowded field with an astute advisory approach. She has over 2 decades of award-winning experience and an unblemished reputation among her fellow agents. She's closed, and pause for dramatic effect, $1 billion in total transactions throughout her career, and she and her team have sold 4 of the 6 most expensive homes in Brooklyn's history. Lindsay is methodical and prepared, and thanks to her former career as a real estate attorney at a prominent New York firm, clients can trust that every step of the process is buttoned up from start to finish. And the result of Lindsay's unwavering professionalism isn't only seen in her steady stream of top producer awards and accolades, but also in the legion of fiercely loyal clients and the extensive referral business she's cultivated over the years. In addition to assisting buyers and sellers in Manhattan and Brooklyn with a specialty in brownstone Brooklyn neighborhoods, she's worked directly with the city's leading developers. To learn more about Lindsay, please visit her website, lindsaybartonbarrettteam.com, and that's Lindsay with an AY. But don't worry, you're not going to have to type it in. We have a link for that right in our show notes, but please do visit it and see what somebody who is at the very, very top of the mountain in real estate, what their website looks like. It's impressive. It's awesome. It's elegant. Anyway, Lindsay, welcome to the show. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
We are very happy to. Lindsay and I were just talking about some other things prior to the show, not real estate related. So I am really excited to learn more about your path and progress and journey through real estate. But I'd love to start all the way at the beginning, because I know in your previous career you were a real estate attorney as well. But how did you get involved in real estate to begin with?
I would say it probably goes back a little before that. I grew up in Seattle, and my dad was wore lots of hats over the years, but was involved in real estate development and construction a little bit at certain points, and in the hotel business as well. And that just it always interested me, because it covers so much ground. It's really personal, yet also tangible. And so I was intrigued by it from an early age, honestly. The construction part of it, all of that. And then I went to law school, and I went to Columbia, which is a very traditional law school approach. Think paper chase. We don't teach you to be a lawyer, we teach you to think like a lawyer. And so it was very theoretical in certain ways, and there was not a lot of specific there were not a lot of specific classes that related to practice areas necessarily offered, including real estate. And maybe there was, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't come out knowing that that was what I wanted to do, but I knew that I was interested in real estate. And so I worked as a corporate attorney briefly. And when I would do diligence on transactions, M&A transactions or something, I still continued to gravitate to the real estate piece of it. So I ended up lateraling between 2 big firms in Manhattan and moved to another firm where I was in a real estate dedicated practice. And I loved it. I loved the pieces of the transactions, but I didn't love the role that I was playing in transactions. I think they're amazing lawyers, but often a lawyer's job is to pinpoint all the potential pitfalls in a transaction instead of focusing on keeping parties together and keeping parties moving forward. And I would work on big transactions where there were both commercial real estate brokers and investment bankers on the deals, and just sitting on conference calls or sitting in the room, I would look at what they were doing and think, that's what I want to be doing. I want to be building things and putting deals together and helping really smart people who know what they want to do get together and do it in a profitable, and they know what they're doing. Our clients really knew what they were doing. And so I often felt that the lawyers were just bringing up the same points every single time that had been resolved in the last iteration of this document. And I didn't like the role that I was playing. And it may have been a function of being at a big firm versus being at a smaller firm. But ultimately, I just felt like between not seeing myself as a New York lawyer and the various sort of the various limitations that can present in terms of hours worked and all of those things, it just became clear to me that I wanted something different in my role and in my sort of in my hours and all of that. And so then I bought an apartment with a tiny bit of money. I put 5% down, I think, on a condo in the East Village in
Which,
2000.
by the way, 5% down on a condo in the East Village is still a tremendous down payment.
It was a long time ago, but yes, it was. And so I put 5% down. I bought a condo in the East Village. And then over the years, and that was one thing that has also been a driver for me of what I do, is that I do have a very sort of quintessential real estate escalation story of I bought the condo in the East Village, turned around and bought a co-op in Cobble Hill, turned around and bought a relatively, for the time and for New York, inexpensive townhouse that ultimately we got renovated. And I sold it this past year for a significant multiple of the condo in the East Village in 2000, but also what we bought it for. So it really, and it enabled me to do this job. I was able to take out a home equity line of credit, so I had something to fall back on. And so real estate has actually really kind of done for me what I think it does for a lot of people, but what I think a lot of people don't really believe happens anymore. So that's sort of my backstory.
Yeah, and there was really a lot there. I just want to unpack a couple of things. Number one, I want to honor you for the courage to walk away from a legal career that you worked. Well, number one, Columbia is not one of the worst law schools in the country. It's actually one of the very top. And that, I'm sure that's how you got to New York. Did you also do your undergraduate in New York as well, or did you just end up there for law school?
I was in upstate New York. I went to Cornell undergrad. So I went to great schools, no complaints here, but it was a different path, but it brought me to where I am now.
Was it difficult to walk away from working so hard to pass the bar and of course working in corporate, the corporate law world, and then to be an M&A activity, mergers and acquisitions, and then say, this isn't I don't want to bill, 1,000 hours a year anymore, or whatever whatever lawyers are billing these days.
Yeah.
I know it's always a staggering number. And sort of trading hours for dollars is really what attorneys do, which is why they work so much. Was that hard
in New
to walk
York
away
especially?
From? Oh,
it was hardest for my mom, I would say.
Sure.
My mom was not happy about the decision.
What are you doing with your life?
Yes. And I should be really nice to my mom right now. She's not doing great, but she was not happy that I quit my job. It was scary. It was definitely scary. And, it's true. You need a real sort of, something to fall back on. And I genuinely got that exclusively by doing a home equity line of credit before I quit my job, taking that money and knowing that I had it, and then leaving. And so it was definitely scary. I felt like I had maybe one client, maybe two. They were sort of friends that graciously trusted me with their home purchase or home search. I think one of them ended up buying and one of them didn't. And then otherwise, I really, I think people look at me and go, oh, you had all these like lawyers. Lawyers are very conservative. I have a lot of law school friends who still rent in New York City. And I graduated
Mhm.
from law school 23 years ago.
Mhm.
So, lawyers turned out not to necessarily be my sort of go-to client base either. And when I left, I knew I didn't really know what I was doing entirely. So I was very nervous to try to tap that
Sure.
resource and mess it up. And so I didn't sort of dive back into the law firm world to try to get clients, because when you first become an agent, your job is getting clients, not doing your
Sure.
job. So yeah, so I was nervous. Obviously, I had a paycheck, and at that point, I had a mortgage, and but I was excited about it, and I felt like I had the cushion, and I could give it time. And if after 6 months it didn't work out, I will move on. But fortunately, it did. It did. I landed in a good place. I had a great support system in terms of my manager and people that I worked with. And I at the time I was engaged, and then ultimately, my husband was supportive, and now he's not my husband anymore. And so yeah, I was able to do it. It was scary, but I was really fortunate in kind of, I don't know, I managed to hit the ground running, and then just build from there and get referrals from the people that I worked with. So
So since you didn't tap the, hey, my friends at the law firm I was at, or certainly people who know me in my field, as you were saying, because I was thinking, oh, this is so brilliant, because all of her clients will be the attorneys she knows.
yeah,
And that turns out, but you usurped my question by saying that is not what happened. So I'm actually really interested in, and yes, I understand, having this previous career that you'd worked so hard for, obviously you can could have fell back
yeah,
onto that I'm sure very easily. So there's some comfort there, I'm sure, but
for
also,
sure.
I don't know, when you were practicing law, I don't know if you were out there securing clients and going out and sort of shaking the hands and getting business, or if more things were assigned to you. But now, now you're on your own, you're in charge of wearing every hat for the business, and also learning how to actually be a decent realtor. Of course, you have become a beyond excellent realtor now. But what was it like in those first 6 months? How did you secure? You had one friend that turned out to be a buyer. The other one didn't, and then it sounded like you were on your own trying to drum up business. How did you do that back then, if you don't mind sharing?
Um, it's funny. I think back, and in some ways, I still don't totally know. I don't remember. And I will also say, and we get this from agents all over the country, price points in New York are quite high, and the reality was at the time, in order to sort of level my real estate salary to where my law firm had been, I think I figured out pretty quickly that I needed to sell something like $8 million. And at the time, maybe, and it probably was a little more. I hate to say this, like, that's not that hard to do in New York. And so even in 2002, I guess, and so my first sale, admittedly, was $1 million sale, which was a big deal. It was a crappy loft in Tribeca. And then I did what young brokers do. I worked open houses for senior brokers for clients. That was probably my second sale. Was a pretty good sale. Also, I think over $1 million from somebody that I met at an open house. And then I worked at Corcoran at the time, and there was a place on the website that you could go in and say, this is what I'm looking for. And I think that was my third sale. And that was probably a $350,000 co-op. And it sort of, I mean, and then there were a couple of associates who I knew at my law firm who referred me to friends. And so sometimes it wasn't the lawyers, but it was friends of lawyers. And honestly, it went from there. And I was fortunate to have one or two listings early on. And that was really where I got buyers. And in 2002, people buying a $400,000 apartment often didn't were not working with brokers. And so there were a lot of direct people. And then I don't remember entirely, but it did it starts to snowball. And I remember very early on in my career, a woman in my office was sort of giving this motivational talk and talked about, it was sort of like the family tree, or like the anatomy of a transaction, and more so of the referral network. And she talked about how she sold a very inexpensive studio to this actor in New York, and then he introduced her to this person, and they introduced her to these two people, and how from this one like $200,000 studio sale, she ended up doing like $15 million in business. So it's really acknowledging that and recognizing that there's always an opportunity, but there's also a good way to do that, and sort of an obnoxious way to do that. And so I think it's finding that middle ground, and staying in front of people. Obviously, I'm a huge proponent, and this is a little more do as I say and not as I do, because I don't always get around to it. But newsletters, I think, are probably the single best source of clients, because they're also free. Mailers are expensive. Like running an ad in New York Magazine is really expensive. Newsletters are free, and you control the content and you control the presentation. And, to this day, anytime we send out a newsletter, we get some response, usually some referral.
Yeah, I did a talk once at a conference that was something, I can't remember the exact title, but it was said, nobody wants to read your newsletter, but that's not the point. And I talked about how whether or not people read the actual content of the newsletter is largely irrelevant, although it's obviously good to have good content, and hopefully some of the people that you send it to might actually read some of the articles. But just this idea from a branding perspective of, hey, this is what I do, here's a little bit of acknowledgement that I know what's going on in the market, I put this together, I'm sending it out. And it's always good to stay if not front of mind, back of mind for your clients. And you're absolutely right, that consistency does in fact work. I was thinking about this, like I know you work with a lot of you work with developers, you work with a lot of new developments. I actually was just thinking, so I purchased in a new development a year and a half ago. And so I've been there a year and a half, a little bit more than a year and a half. And I have not received any communication from any other realtors. Usually you start getting postcards and things. And I understand that on the statistical side, people who purchased it on my building probably aren't going to purchase for the next or sell for the next, I don't know, 5 years, who knows, 7 years, whatever it is. So I get it. There's a long-term play here if you want to start introducing, but there's 45,000 realtors in the Chicagoland area, not one postcard from anyone going, hey, congrats on your new purchase. By the way, I would love to just learn more about you. I want to keep you updated on, what's going on with your place. Again, tons of opportunity, right, to like build relationships. And that's what you do really, really well is build relationships. You were talking about this, how your friend, one transaction, for one person can lead to $15 million in production over time. That is clearly the way that you've done it. But I wanted to ask you, because you said something that I thought was very interesting. You said there's an obnoxious way to sort of build those relationships. And then there's a way that is, more, gentle and non-invasive. And do you mind
Yeah.
sharing a little bit about how you think about, maybe asking for a referral, or maybe you don't ask, maybe you demonstrate value in a different way, but how do you do it in a way that's most comfortable for you?
I definitely am one of those people who I have a hard time asking for things, honestly. I don't, they're probably friends of mine who might say that's not true, but um I don't like to be pushy, and
Yeah.
I don't like to be salesy. I remember my mom was not happy when I left my job, and my dad was like, it said to me, you really don't have a salesman's personality. And what I said to him is, I don't feel like I'm going into sales. I'm not chasing people down on the street and saying, "Do you want to buy an apartment?" I'm I'm fulfilling the need that they already have. They're choosing to at least explore the possibility, and I'm working in an advisory capacity, and I view myself as being a professional and not a salesperson. So I think that goes across the board, whether it's how you're trying to sell a property or how you're trying to sell yourself as a broker, is by and large, I try to be as valuable as possible to my clients so that, of course, they'll refer me. I certainly have sort of, I guess, the typical call to action kind of things in my newsletter of, if you're looking, if anybody's considering a real estate purchase, if you need any advice, call us. But beyond that, we don't really.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, if I am talking to somebody I know really well, um, I will say something explicitly along the lines of, "Hey, we always really appreciate referrals." And of course, when I get one, I try very hard to call that person right away. And I think it's important. And this is a lesson I've learned from other people, but I think I've learned it for myself too. A referral is not about the sale; it's about the referral. And
Right.
so you can't wait until somebody buys, and they might not, but you want to encourage people to refer you business. So even if they refer you a crappy client, you can even call and say, "I really appreciate the referral," just so like, that's not really necessarily the type of business that I do. I can find somebody to refer them to, but if you're ever talking to someone, like, this is a great referral for me.
Well, and isn't
Yeah.
that what attorneys do as well? Because attorneys get these calls all the time because people think, oh, attorneys just can do everything and every
Yeah.
specialty. And so this is very much often what happens with attorneys. We're like, oh, I don't do that, but my buddy does. And you know
Mhm.
what? And nobody says to the attorney who isn't able to service that client, well, gosh, I don't even know why I called you. You can't handle
Yeah.
that. No, the person goes, hey, you know what? I'm a specialist in this, but my buddy does this. I'm going to send you
Yeah.
over to him or her. And so it really shouldn't work any differently with realtors. I think you're right. There may be this fear of like, oh, now they're not going to refer me anyone else because I wasn't able to help this person. But I
Mhm.
think as long as you're providing value, like you said, and just passing it off to somebody who does do that, that's, I don't see any negative to that at all.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. You want people to recognize you as their go-to for
Yeah.
anything real estate. And so I think to that end, it's also really important to have a great referral network yourself. And so if you're always getting if people are always calling you who say, "Okay, well, I'm looking at Park Slope, but I'm also looking at Montclair, New Jersey," it's important to have someone in Montclair, New Jersey. And so, if you don't do rentals, you need to have a really good rental broker. I say this again, do as I say, not as I do, because I've searched for that, and it's always a challenge, because that market's also changing quickly. And so sometimes your best rental brokers end up deciding they also don't want to do rentals. But I think it's important to have a great referral network. There's the obvious ones. You got to have a great lawyer, got to have a great mortgage broker, or several of each. But you also need great referral brokers in other markets that you might cross over with.
Yeah, and again, that's how attorneys are very
Yeah.
good at this, right? I
Yeah.
think attorneys are almost better at referrals than any other profession I'm aware of. I mean, they just see. I always ask attorneys, like, how do you get business? And they're like, well, I get a lot of referrals from these different channels, and it seems like so much more of a mystery on how to do it as a realtor. So I imagine with that background, you probably just were naturally more understanding of, I do this, and I have this very specific focus because that's where I can provide them the most amount of value, and I need to have this other almost team in place for anything that's outside of those really strict boundaries, because I'm just not going to be as effective as, the person down the street who that's what they do. So that makes so much sense. We talk about that a lot on the show, but I think it can't probably be talked about enough, this idea of having this really strong referral network, which hopefully also is two-way, that comes with
Yeah,
me coming
exactly.
back to you.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about, so, you being in New York during, of course, the pandemic, and seeing, a lot of people sort of leaving the city because, of course, New York had a lot of publicity around, COVID, and
Yeah.
the effects that it had. You guys were basically sort of the epicenter of the United States, part of COVID, at least at the beginning. And you
Mhm.
saw a lot of uncertainty around the city. It seems like that's changed. And so it seems like people are returning more so to the city, and also to places like Brooklyn. Well, Brooklyn's always been super cool and awesome, and I imagine, or it hasn't always been, but it's certainly over the last 20-30 years it's really changed. But were you concerned at all during that time that, oh, my business might radically shift based on these sort of uncontrollable sort of things going on in the world?
Not for long. I definitely had that moment of just absolute panic that made no sense. I remember very distinctly walking along the reservoir upstate with my kids, because we spent much of COVID at our house upstate, like many New Yorkers did, near Woodstock. And I remember a moment of panic of, what am I going to do? And then really, over the course of the next couple weeks, I was really focused on trying to get the deals done that were kind of hanging in the balance. But it also really highlighted to me that real estate, the selling residential real estate, is everyone will always need to buy and sell, and I think Barbara Corcoran at some point said, it's always a broker's market, whether it's a buyer's market or a seller's market. If you're a good broker, you should be selling because things are selling. That being said, I there's been a lot of talk about all of this because the market has changed. And I was having a conversation with someone for some sort of pretty well-known publication, and we were having a really interesting conversation. And the reality is, what you do need for a market is buyers. And if you have no buyers, you have no market. And so that was certainly a difficult, and the market self corrects. So if you don't have buyers, at some point you're going to drop the price low enough where you have buyers. But that was certainly a fear at some point. But I don't know if I'm just a little bit deep down, even though I don't seem like it necessarily, a little bit of a Pollyanna, that I believe that things are going to work out. But I've lived in New York for 27 years, 25 years, excuse me. And New York is unlike, New York is unlike any city, as is Chicago, as is, all of these sort of world capitals are unique and they're desirable. They have so much to offer. And I will also say that I had a very selfish moment of going, people are really going to want to live in townhouses now. And that was absolutely the case. So yeah, there were certainly concerns. There are always concerns as things change dramatically, like we're going through right now. Frankly, uncertainty is difficult in any market. But I knew even if people left, people would come to take their places. And I mean, we've already seen people who left during COVID come back. So so no, I was not very worried for very long. I knew that there would be a lot of adaptations, and there was a lot of talk about selling, houses via FaceTime and this and that. And I didn't think that was going to last long either. And I think that's largely the case. I mean, we've done a few deals, sight unseen, not many, certainly people who've done like a first tour FaceTime, but it's a big purchase and it's personal. And I didn't think that there was going to be much duration of people buying from videos and stuff.
Yeah, and that seems to have kind of gone away at this point. Although what's nice is for people that are able to do that and willing to do that, it's just much more normalized now. So
Yeah.
even though we're back to being in person, hopefully that will not change, although who knows. But at least that's been normalized, throughout the last several years. So you do have people that are more willing to explore virtual conversations. So it's a nice option that isn't bizarre or weird or it's just been normalized. So I suspect that's been good for agents who do have some clients who maybe are like, you know what, let's just show up with the FaceTime and let's walk through it virtually. I had a question, two questions, because you work with a lot of developers. And so it's funny, whenever we do episodes, of course, most of the brokers we have on the show, and I say broker again, synonymous here where I'm from with realtor. So if I say broker, not everyone in the country doesn't always know what that means. We'll just, please excuse my language. That will be realtor. But anyway, a lot of the realtors we have on the show are top producers. Almost all of them are, and a lot of them work in the luxury market. And that's for people who don't work in the luxury market. That's oftentimes something they feel like they should aspire to, is to being a luxury broker. But also developers. That's the other one that people get really excited about, because it's seen as this, I've arrived if developers are now choosing me to represent their developments. And of course, there's a certain truth to that. How did you start to get involved with developers? What was it that allowed you to win over their trust in their business?
Admittedly, in part, I started a development company with my ex-husband. So my ex-husband was an architect. And I was when we talked about it on our first date, it was very pathetic. So he was an architect and I was a real estate lawyer, and we were both really interested in development. And we started a real estate development company and did a bunch of condo projects in the area of Brooklyn where we lived at the time. And that really helped me get my foot in the door. And I was much more in that world of other developers. And so I think other developers saw that I really understood. And often there isn't always an alignment of what the broker wants and what the developer wants in terms of incentive structure. I mean, as a broker, you're happy for them to spend, no limit of money on advertising, because it's going to help bring people in. And of course, you're going to be able to sell things for higher prices if you have more demand for the product and all of those things, but it's not necessarily one-to-one. But if you're also invested in just the ultimate success of the project and the absolute success of the project, you're going to have a different perspective. And so I think that certainly was important. I
just wanted to jump in for a second and say, like, what you just said is actually quite profound, because developers want people who understand what the pain points of a developer are, which of course, yes, getting the property sold. Yes, obviously that's why they're hiring you. But for the agent to say, or to at least have the mindset of, I don't want I'm not going to keep coming to you, Mr. Developer, for more ad dollars, or I don't want to keep investing myself as the agent into, more than I think is reasonable. But understanding that it is a business, and running it like a business, and it goes beyond just you selling the property, having an understanding of what developers deal with, since you've done that, it was obviously part of your family history as well, I think gives you a tremendous advantage when meeting with developers. You're like, I grew up with this. Number one,
Yeah.
I know it. I've been on all sides of it, and I've also run my own development company, which again, it's funny. I hope that our audience is really inspired by that, because anyone listening can build their own development company as well. And if you don't, if your husband isn't an architect, which of course most of our listeners don't have that in their immediate family, go out and find an architect. There are millions of them who absolutely are probably waiting for somebody to partner up with. So it is something that, again, is a really smart way to sort of get involved with developers, because then you get to say, when you're pitching to other developers, oh, I do this also, by the way, maybe on a smaller scale, or maybe on in a different, sector, but this is what I know, what you deal with, and I want to help
Mhm.
you. And I imagine that's a very powerful pitch.
Yeah, I certainly think it is, but I also do, you know, I think that one thing I also believe strongly about being an agent or being a broker or a realtor, it's a job. And so I think it's important not to sort of look at it as something where you're also going to be doing this, also going to be doing this. Like, I think coming to developers, I think one of the best ways to sort of digest that is to make sure that you do understand that person's business. Just like when you have a residential client who's looking for a new home, knowing that they have family overseas who comes to stay all the time, and they need a separate place for that person to stay that feels a little separate, and they've got space and they've got their own little kitchen, like that. If you don't know that, you're going to show people the wrong thing. And so I think understanding how it works as a developer and the profit structure, and knowing that if you only suggest the most expensive stager, they may feel like you don't have their interests at heart and you don't even understand what their business is. And so I think it's really important to communicate that you will protect them by only coming to them with things that you have evaluated yourself and say, okay, the juice is worth the squeeze, or whatever. Like, we're going to spend $20,000 on this campaign, but I think ultimately it's going to translate into a 2% increase in sale prices, which is $200,000. So, I think it's acknowledging that that's their money, and you're not just going to spend their money because it's going to produce better materials, or so I think that's probably the most important part, is just this understanding your client.
Yeah, I agree. Yes. And again, that's probably also the skills you developed as an attorney. It's probably incredibly helpful for how important it is to get a good sense of what the client wants and needs, so that, you can continue working for them in a way that is most effective for them. Question about sort of today's market. So we know, of course, everyone listening to the show knows rates have changed, doubled in a lot of cases, maybe even more than doubled at this point.
Yeah.
Seems to change almost daily, and I don't know what it's at today, but it certainly has gone up. So rates are double what they were at the lowest point, which I don't think is maybe the best metric to measure against, but it's what people know, because it was so prominently featured in news and social media, how rates were so low, and now people maybe feel, oh, I missed out. Except, of course, what they maybe don't always know is there were lots and lots of buyers, and prices were inflated, and maybe it's not so different now, even though rates have changed. But there just may be a lot more sentiment out there that now's not the time to make any big moves. So understanding that those are some hurdles that realtors are dealing with all over the country. How have you been dealing with that? How have you been educating your clients and just keeping your business going, despite the fact that there probably are fewer buyers in the market at this point?
I think that's absolutely true. There definitely are fewer buyers and fewer real buyers, because even if people, I mean, and it's really hard, even if people feel like real buyers, if you were looking a month ago and then you went on vacation or something and came back and then you find something and then you get your pre-approval updated, I think we're seeing that a lot. We're seeing more deals fall apart. And I think that's probably part of it, is that people are not internalizing or properly sort of analyzing what these rate changes mean. But I will say, I think it's really important to recognize that rates are fluid and they go up, but they are very likely to come down again. And so if, I've had this conversation with a few clients recently, and many of whom said, that's true. I really hadn't thought about it that way. And of course, when rates are super low, you're really excited because you can lock in this rate for a long time and you know what your monthly outlay is going to be. But when rates are high, it's important to remember it doesn't have to stay like that forever. And so, real estate is a long-term play, almost no matter what. And when you're buying a home, maybe life does change and you end up selling it in 3 years. But, I for most of my clients, any clients who are not investors, my recommendation to them is you can't really have any expectation of appreciation unless you plan to stay in this home for at least probably 5 years. You never know. And you need to have flexibility on that, because if the market's in the toilet in 5 years, you want to be able to hang on to it for another 2 or move on. But it's a long-term play. And because rates, we have seen, have changed so quickly, so dramatically, we don't know what's going to happen. And I'm not going to promise anybody that rates are going to go back down to 3% for a 30-year fixed, but I can tell people with some degree of confidence that I certainly think they'll go down again in a meaningful way over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. So I think it is an opportunity. I think that will take some time, because sellers are having a hard time adjusting.
Sure.
So that's
I can't get twice the listing price anymore. Yeah.
Or I can't get exactly the same price that they got down the street.
Right.
And then we work in different markets. We work across a lot of price points, and for New York, and I certainly recognize that. And it's one thing we are seeing is the very high end Brooklyn in particular turnkey townhouse market is stable. There aren't really many rental alternatives. If you want a really nice townhouse in Brooklyn Heights, there's not one to rent. So you may still end up in the sale market. There's a lot of liquidity at that price point. And so we are really having a hard time getting a meeting of the minds at that price point, but things are staying pretty stable. At lower price points, people are a little bit more understanding that interest rates have really made a big hit. And so, I'm sure everyone's going through the same thing. It's educating your sellers, educating your buyers, keeping buyers' spirits elevated, that what they're doing is good for themselves and their family long term.
I think it seems like so many people, and it's so because it oftentimes is a buyer's or largest asset or one of their largest assets. It becomes this idea that this primary residence is an investment, and I think the realtors could. I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. Could really do their clients a favor by readjusting that expectation. That number one, yes, okay, maybe technically it's an investment, but you have to live somewhere, right? And so
Mhm.
even if it does go up by, 2 times what you paid for it, odds are you're not downsizing on your next home. That's not usually the sort of human nature psychology piece of it. Is it's like, well, I'm just going to bank this extra 500 grand I just made. Usually it's like, now we can upgrade to a higher price point property. Maybe
Mhm.
once somebody hits retirement age, that changes and they downsize, and then yeah, they can bank some of that money. But that's not usually what most people do with their profit from their primary residence. At least that's not been my experience with anybody I know. Maybe the most savvy people would do that, but most of us, we don't buy a 20-inch TV when we're, a teenager and that's all we can afford. And then when we're 40, we go, let's go back to a 20-inch TV, right? It goes, no, I want the 65-inch or the 80-inch or whatever. We keep going bigger and bigger until we realize maybe things are too big. But the point is it's my sister did this. Her place almost doubled in value in the West Village. She was on Barrow, which is like beyond amazing street. I'm sure you know it. And
Yes.
then, fifth floor walk up, no air condition, a little tiny unit, no amenities really. It was a co-op, and fifth floor walk up, and it was like 475 square feet, 1 bedroom. That includes a 1 bedroom. It was just this little tiny nothing place, but it was lovely, but it was just tiny, and everything was miniature and stuff. And then she took that money, and then she goes, well, now I can't live in my neighborhood anymore, because even though she had made all this money, she had actually priced herself out of her actual
Yeah.
street. And so she ended up moving to Queens with her fiance at the time, and it ended up working out for them. But again, people don't usually go from a 475 square foot, co-op to, maybe I'll just stay at 475 square
Yeah.
feet, right? So this idea that people see their primary home as an investment, I think can be very problematic. And I think it's just not an investment, maybe, unless it is something that generates income, or that, you're going to move to an investment property at some point. But this idea of that, realtors can really re-educate their clients about this. Let's not think of this as an investment as much as a lifestyle and quality of life sort of situation. I think that would quell. And also, dating the rate on the lending side, marrying the home, that's that
Yeah.
expression it's sort of a cutesy expression that people say, but it's a good expression, because I think it's
Yeah.
exactly right. I mean, rates do change, people refinance, and we're not in the double digits, right? It's not the late 70s, early 80s anymore,
Yeah.
which that was a really difficult times. I can't even imagine what it's like to try to be a buyer's agent when it's 12% rates, but people were doing it then too. So
Yeah.
anyway, I've gone on enough of a rant about that, but I really appreciate your thoughts about it, because I think, for anyone out there who's going, gosh, the buyers just aren't into it, they feel like they're getting ripped off at this point, time to re-educate yourself as the agent about how to have that conversation, to say, you know what, even if you would have tried to buy a place 2 years ago, here's what you probably would have paid over asking for what you're looking for. I'm going to show you evidence that would have suggested that, maybe it wasn't such a great time for you, or maybe it can still be a good time today, and we can refinance in a couple of years if need be.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm sorry, I will get off
No,
my
it's okay.
little soapboxy rant there, but I want agents to not be so disheartened during this time. And you have a $1 billion business that you've built, and that is beyond impressive. I want to ask sort of my last question, which is, so you talked about newsletters, we talked about client relationships, and how one can lead to one plus one, can lead
Yeah.
to dozens and
Yeah.
dozens and dozens. What advice do you have for agents who want to further develop those relationships, make those more intimate, make those more important, really demonstrate value, so that in between sales, maybe those people, again, you mentioned newsletters, keep your name in front of them, but what else
Mhm.
are you doing just so that your clients don't forget about you, or that they keep thinking about you when they're talking to other people who might need your services?
I am not as good at that as I should be, quite honestly, and in many ways because I've been fortunate in building these relationships that largely feed themselves. I mean, and the New York market, it is a unique thing. I know that it has remained strong in times when others have not been. I think this COVID experience was really unique in that it was one of the few times that we've seen, somebody selling in New York and buying somewhere else, and they don't come out ahead, and not necessarily in actual like dollars in your pocket, but in terms of the strength of the market, that that you're getting top dollar in New York, and that you're buying at a little bit of a discount wherever you may be going. And that really got flipped on its head. And that was a big adjustment. But it was also a really interesting illustration of what drives people, and people were buying because they wanted to move. And so they were able to just say, look, this is what's right for me. This is what I want, and I'm going to do it. And this is the price. This is the price that it is today. And so I think that it's important for people to remember that, and this touches on what you were saying. You're doing this for yourself and for your future self and for your family. And, you got to make the choice that's right for you, that is somewhat untethered from, is this the right investment? And so, and I'm going to go back 1 second a little bit about that, because I totally understand and agree with you that it is not exclusively an investment. But I think another way to look at that, and I've spoken to clients a number of times, is it is a lifetime investment. And very rarely are people selling and then renting, unless it's sort of a temporary, either move for one reason or another, a renovation, a relocation, or whatever, maybe, a strategic decision. But people are generally staying in the market. So, we get so many people who say, I can't lose money on this house. Well, if you're selling at a discount, whatever you're buying in all likelihood is also at that same discount. It's a lifetime. And so in your, lifetime portfolio of real estate holdings, you're probably going to come out ahead of the stock market. Historically, that is what has happened. And so I think don't get so fixated on every one transaction, because that's not what it is. It's a lifetime of owning your home. And there are ways to leverage that. If you have a rental unit, you can do a 1031 exchange and you feel like genius. There's a lot of different ways to leverage real estate ownership. And so I think that's important to focus on also. And frankly, you still do get that primary residence interest deduction. So I think that's something we should really be focusing on right now too, because if you're paying more, you're getting a much larger deduction. So that's something. That's my sort of callback to the last one.
No, I appreciate that. And I want to just wrap up, because you have this has been so valuable to our audience. I always like, when I first started this show all these years ago, it was like, oh, all of these top producers are going to have all of these very specific strategies and tips that the rest of us don't know about. What I've learned after 400 episodes is that is rarely the case, that there's like this little secret magic formula that, we're going to unearth on this show. And it hasn't happened yet, but maybe in the next 400 episodes, somebody will have that. But the reality of it is, it isn't much about that at all. And it's more about consistency and discipline, and also just understanding how people think who are really at the top of the mountain as a realtor. And so I think you've given us some great strategies, but on top of that, just this idea of like, here's how I think about things. Here's how I keep going. Because at the end of the day, sort of, I think mindset, and again, that word is, I think, really overused, and it sort of doesn't even mean a whole lot anymore. But this idea of just the beliefs and the strategies that somebody has, that, like you were saying, Barbara Corcoran saying, there's always buyers and sellers. There's just always a broker's market.
Yeah.
It's about making sure that you can pivot and adjust to those changes. And I also want to mention that Lindsay is currently looking for one additional team member. Now, this is $1 billion team. So she doesn't, of course, take any and all agents that reach out to her. And in fact, you'd have to probably be somebody that is really impressive and she did not say that to me. I'm saying it on her behalf because I know that she's going to expect somebody who is really somebody dynamic and special. But if you are a realtor in the the New York market, specifically Brooklyn, Manhattan, anywhere there that you think you could be of value and you could be a valued member of her team, reach out to her. The best way to do that, just go to her website. You can submit some information. And also, by the way, for everyone else who's listening, who's a realtor, whether you're in New York or elsewhere in the country, if you have clients that are moving to the city, moving to Brooklyn, moving to other places in the New York metro area, and you're looking for a top producer to send them to, well, obviously Lindsay is a great choice. She's at an amazing firm. We've interviewed tons of people from Douglas Elliman over the years, and they're always just really best of the best. Obviously, Douglas Elliman's doing something right in their hiring, but also if you are looking for a broker to refer to, Lindsay would love the opportunity to connect with you. Lindsay, what is the best way another agent can reach out to you?
Website, definitely. And we have a team email, which we did by necessity. Over the years, sort of figured out some of the things, and everyone responding to the same email at once. And sometimes responding from my email, and then I also respond, gave rise to the LBB team email. So lbbteam@elliman.com is probably the best way.
And we'll post a link to that in the show notes as well. So if you are an agent that wants to partner with Lindsay with referrals, or maybe you're looking to explore being on a team yourself and you live in that area, reach out to Lindsay to see if you might be a good fit for her. And by the way, she's not always hiring like most real estate firms. Like our firm, we're always hiring. So you can always reach out to me if you want to join our company in Chicago. But Lindsay is not that kind of agent and doesn't have that kind of team. It's a very exclusive, small team that she can really manage, and work with and make sure that, all of her team members are having success. So definitely reach out to her if you think that would be a good fit. Lindsay, thank you so much for being on the show. I had such fun time with you. You really appreciate how busy you are, and really just, again, walking away from a really, really sort of something that you had worked so hard for, and not walked away entirely, but walked away from that being your profession and your source of income is truly, it's really, again, this courageous quality that you have, I think is amazing. And so I hope it's inspiring to our audience. And also, we want to thank Lindsay for her time. We know how busy she is. And so on behalf of the audience, we say thank you to you. And also on behalf of Lindsay and myself, we want to thank the audience for not only sticking around throughout the whole episode, but also hopefully finding value here. And we just ask that you do one thing, which is tell a friend. Think of one other realtor that needs to hear this conversation that we just had, and send them a link to our websites, keepingitrealpod.com. We'll have that link to that in the show notes as well. But please tell other realtors about our show. It's how we've grown over the last 5 years now. And so we want to continue to grow and reach more and more realtors. So anyway, on behalf of everyone, Lindsay, thank you. And we will see everybody on the next episode. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.